Today's presentation is called the Moneyball of Leadership. If you all remember the movie Moneyball, they figured out a system that generated performance, and that's what Charlie and Meghan are here to talk about today. Without further ado, Charlie and Meghan.
This is a picture of our leadership team where the bulk of our leadership is voted on every year, and the employees pick who they want to follow. And there's a combination of putting in votes of people you don't want to follow and the reasons why, as well as votes for the people you want to follow. So it just gives you a sense of how we run. But I'm going to talk about the Moneyball of leadership, the whole notion of how to create high performance. When you think of leadership, I think a lot of times it's a soft skill. So people think about the softer things, the pink squishy stuff. And then, of course, when it comes to the hard skills, you think of words like strategy. And strategy is very hard, but the softer things like leadership is even harder. So I'm going to first start by talking about strategy and the connection of strategy into leadership, because the two, of course, are very interrelated. Meghan and I have the privilege of meeting with a lot of amazing people, and we spend time not only helping them, but getting help back from them. One of the individuals just last week we met was General Odierno, who ran the US Army. And he was part of a team that was brought in to help coach JP Morgan Chase's operating committee. It's 20 of the most senior people at Chase. So he was brought in, Meghan and myself was brought in, so we spent half a day coaching this group of 20 individuals that basically run Chase under Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase. General Odierno, as well as another individual, was brought in as well. But what struck me about what he said when he was coaching them was this quote here. He talked about how the world is getting so complicated, you have to decentralize decision-making. Do you really know where your enemy is for sure? And the winning model is to build adaptive learning teams. Now, we do a lot of work with the DoD, with the military in every service. And without offending anybody who has a background in the Army, if we had a rank order the most innovative of the services and the least innovative, we would put the Army at the bottom. It's the biggest group, right? Command and control, right? I think the idea of decentralized decision-making, learning teams, adaptive teams, this is not what comes to mind when I think about Army. But to have the former head of the Army talk about how this is not an option, but it's a requirement, says everybody else above their level of innovation is behind the times. If the Army, the former Army head is saying this, you have to wake up and say, wait a sec, am I behind the idea of where I need to be? This term got coined, I believe, by the military and then got popularized by Harvard of VUCA. VUCA standing for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The fact that the world is getting so complicated. I always use the example if you have children parenting. When I was parented, there was not as much complexity as it is now. You need like 60-page PowerPoints to figure out what you can and can't bring to school, the things you can and can't say, the words you can't use, the ways you can't act. It has gotten so complicated. The idea of every company we have met in every organization globally falls in one of two buckets. You're either being disrupted or you're a disruptor. And if you're not sure which side you fall in, I'll tell you which side you fall in. You're being disrupted. And this is a theme we've heard everywhere. It's coming everywhere. And so there's another individual we met just last week, Tuesday, when we were at JP Morgan Chase training their leaders, a guy by the name of Roger Martin. Now, JP Morgan Chase is amongst the Fortune 500 companies of the world. In fact, they're Fortune 23. So any expert money can buy, JP Morgan Chase, to train their top 20 leaders, they're bringing them in. So General Odierno is a consultant for Chase. So is this guy, Roger Martin, who wrote a book, partnered with A.G. Lafley, who's the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. They went and studied CEOs and companies, and what they found was that companies have outgrown traditional management, because this is how companies used to run. CEOs worried most of other big companies. Procter & Gamble worried about other big companies like them. GM worried about Ford and Chrysler, and that's the way they operated. At the same time, what they produced was products and services. So products and services, or some form, is what they produced, and strategy changed every 1 to 5 years. You hear about the 5-year plan, the 1-year plan. So this is the way the world has been working. When they went and spent time studying organizations and everything they brought, and Roger Martin's one of the experts in how to build winning strategy, CEOs worry of something totally different today. 2 kids in a garage. The organization the size of GM worries about two kids in a garage simply with their imagination and creativity having the ability to put GM out of business. JP Morgan Chase with FinTech is worried sick of who is going to put them out of business, and it's not Citibank. It's not Deutsche Bank or Bank of America. It's actually two kids in a garage. What you produce is no longer products and services. Most organizations are producing decisions. You are a decision factory. Langley is a decision factory. This is what you're producing, and the decisions have to be right. There's a real cost if you get it wrong. Strategy, it changes every day. When you make strategy, you have assumptions, you have rationale, you have logic that goes into it, but the assumptions that you make, they're changing all the time. And if you don't check in with those assumptions, you'll see oftentimes you write a strategic plan for a year, for 5 years, it's obsolete the day you launch it the very next day. So this is how the world is changing. And this is what Roger Martin talked to with a firm the size of Chase with 330,000 employees. David Rose is an individual we know well. He runs one of the largest angel investor networks in New York City. And David, I love this quote, he said, "Any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to fail in the 21st century. Any company designed to run and succeed in the 20th century is doomed to fail in the 21st century." Every company on this page, there's one thing they have in common. They all went bankrupt. They had models, strategies, management structures that did not let them succeed. Every airline had to go bankrupt to come back and rechange and structure how they run in order to succeed. Jeff Bezos, if you think of what he did, 15 years to build his print book business. In 2 years, he destroys his own print book business by building an ebook business. He disrupts himself. 2 years of what took 15 years. This is what Jeff will talk about, on being disrupted or being a disruptor. Who is going to kill me? If we don't move, I got to kill myself before they kill me. He is now looking to disrupt the ebook business. Everything possible. He is going to disrupt himself before someone else disrupts him. And that's the mindset that you have to operate in today. That is not an option. So what's interesting when we think of strategy, the old way versus the new way, one of the most common mistakes in strategy is to divorce strategy from execution. But how many times have you heard, this was an amazing plan, an amazing strategy, they just executed it poorly? There is no such thing. Strategy is tied to execution. Think of a sports team. If you have an amazing play, but the players just didn't run it well, the play is wrong. The plays have to factor in your people. It has to factor in the entire execution process. If not, it is poor strategy. If you think of what strategy is made up of, there are ingredients of people who end up creating products and services, and then numbers are your metrics. That can be anything from financial metrics, KPIs, key performance indicators. And the old way of operating on strategy was to start on the right and go left. And in fact, the most common thing that people would do in their strategic planning process is come with your big goals of numbers you want to hit. What are your goals? Break it down then into annual, quarterly, maybe even monthly and weekly goals. Put some metrics behind it, key performance indicators. Then find the leader who's going to execute it and build a compensation plan around it to motivate them. And if they don't work, get rid of them, put someone else in charge. That's literally how companies ran for years, decades. And then they will figure out how to build the right products, and they'll figure out how to manage their people. So the whole model has flipped. But what's fascinating is what started to happen in our industry. We're in the technology industry. They kind of created an in-between solution. Technology companies, even in presenting for funding, saying that I want to be worth $1 billion, a unicorn, they would actually leave out financials. They would leave out metrics, and they would talk about this obsession on product. They went to this middle ground solution where 80% of their focus was on products. User interfaces, usability. If you make something gorgeous, something amazing in product, the rest will take care of itself. Except in the last 5 years, they ran into one major problem. They can't find engineers. They couldn't find the people to build those products. And in fact, in the US alone, the number of open positions for engineers, just software engineers, was 3 million last year. Unfilled positions. So if you have any children, you're worried about them getting jobs, take them have them go be an engineer. All engineers, there's zero unemployment. If they're unemployed, it's by choice. They're trying to build something on their own. So if you think of the real inputs of actually what drives strategy and the execution element of strategy, 80% of it is tied to people and getting them to make the right decisions, which then lead to the right products, and the numbers follow. You have to still look at the numbers, but the whole model has flipped. And every organization we met, government, nonprofit, public, private, everyone's trying to catch up to what's changing these models. So when we think of the noise versus signal, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to decision making, the amount of advice that exists out there, whether it's a TED Talk, it's a book, research, white papers, there's so much. I'm sure you have to wonder, do I have to know all of it? What can I say no to? When you think of strategy, the idea that strategy drives performance shouldn't be a leap. Great strategy will drive performance. But the question is, so what drives great strategy? You're talking about decisions. The number of decisions you make, micro decisions, decisions on a real-time basis, that is a driver of strategy which leads to performance. So who makes decisions? Who makes decisions in organizations? It's leadership. It's leadership that's making decisions. And what we'll talk about, both myself and Meghan, is two different ways to look at how leadership works. From the side of running teams, and then, of course, running yourself. So leading the organization as well as leading yourself. Just really quick about NextJump. We've been in business 24 years. I started the company. Meghan joined around 19 years ago as a student intern, and as of last year became the co-CEO. So we run NextJump together in partnership. So I'm the founder and co-CEO. She's the co-CEO. We have two businesses in our company. The left side is how we make money. We built an e-commerce business that's very similar to Amazon, Alibaba, but it's for employees of companies. 4,000 large companies, 100,000 small businesses. If you're an employee at Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Facebook, Tesla, we built a special shopping commerce platform for those employees. Very successful, multi-billion in sales annually, profitable, and it funds our second business, which is where Meghan and I spend more of our time in, which we call our Business 2, which is a social movement. It's a social movement where this is our way to give back and how we believe we can impact the world, where we believe if you can change how people work, you can fix most of the problems in the world. Because all of us in this room spend 85% of our waking hours at work. And so trying to fix everything else is fixing the sideshow. The main course, the main event, is actually work. And so we spend a lot of time between giving culture tours. We have these leadership academies, which Parker mentioned. So we do around 3,000 to 4,000 culture tours. For a 200 employee person company, every employee had to learn to give a tour. It's happening between our San Francisco, London, Boston, and New York office. And then we run these monthly leadership academies that start to go every Thursday, and then 3-day events starting in 2014 every month. The who's who of people have gone through. The CIA's team, every division of the US military. We have Congress, we have Fortune 500 companies, startups, charter schools, every company globally you can imagine, thousands of leaders going through, and it's all pro bono. And people have said it's the best leadership course they've ever taken. And 3 days they get immersed in our company. The wait list to attend is over 1,000 deep. So what it's done, though, is it's given myself and Meghan, who, for the most part, we run the education arm of our social movement, of understanding leadership and how to develop people better. We have a bird's eye view, seeing into almost everyone's organization. And the power of not charging, the power of not trying to bill more hours or more dollars, you get to the chase really quick. We cut through and we say, we're here to make impact just like today. We want to add value, want to add impact. We're not interested in a contract or billings or more hours. If it can happen shorter is what we care about. And that's been a privileged position we're in. In the talk, I'm going to talk about the left side. So this is the blue versus the pink, blue representing myself. Leading your organization. And we use the word coaching oftentimes more than mentoring, because mentoring can be charitable. You have mentors who meet you once a year, once a quarter, that's all great. But it's a charitable element in the sense of they don't require performance. There's something different with a coach. They require performance. Coaches fire their players that aren't performing, and they go find better ones. at least the best coaches. So we'll talk about the notion of how to create performance from an organizational point of view, leading the organization. Meghan will then talk about the exact same thing from the flip side, which is what's going on in your head. How do you lead yourself? Moneyball. If you've watched the movie, if you've read the book, it's interesting because around 2 decades ago, this book got published by Michael Lewis studying the Oakland A's. And in the game of baseball, I mean, baseball is metrics oriented. I mean, you ever see a baseball scorecard? It's similar to probably going to war in fighter pilot mode and whatnot. A lot of metrics. And of course, it's about performance. You have to win. It's a big money game. And most baseball players got measured in RBIs and home runs. And what they found in the data, and this is the notion of Moneyball, they found a metric that was a predictor of performance that nobody found valuable, and so they weren't measuring it and they weren't paying for it. And it's what they called on-base percentage. The number of times you're on base, and what that was really measuring was walks. Not hits, but the ability for a player to actually walk and get on base. But it's not glamorous. You want to go out there, you want to swing the bat, you want to hit home runs, you want to make hits, and that's what accounted as a great baseball player, except if you are able to get walks, it's not guaranteeing a win, but the game continues. As a member of the team, you're able to continue the game, increasing the odds of winning. So this on-base percentage became a huge thing. The Oakland A's, with a fraction of the budget of the Yankees and the Red Sox, was able to create performance and get into the World Series consistently above any other team, at a fraction of the budget. So the book got written, and what's funny is baseball initially rejected the book. Every other organization, non-sports, started adopting it. Business in particular became a bestseller. If you look at sports teams today, there's not a sports team that doesn't talk about a Moneyball metric. There's a Moneyball of hockey, Moneyball of basketball. There's a Moneyball of every sport. Nobody runs this business of sports without looking at Moneyball metrics. So we'll talk about Moneyball. And here's a very poor attempt. This is not NextJump's data, but here's a very poor attempt at Moneyball, and this is for hiring. So what you're seeing in the upper right is a chart of data of preferred versus the blue being the actual salary people accepted. And you're seeing by age group, so 20 to 25, all the way up to 40 to 45, and then you see what happens around 50, the salaries go down. So this is in the research we found, and this is what they talked about in this research report. Somehow in our minds, that 35-year-old with 3 screaming kids in soccer practice 4 nights a week is more effective than the 50-year-old with no kids at home who's willing to work wherever and whenever you need them. So now you can play Moneyball. We found a loophole in the system. You can hire people who are qualified for less. So you already know that most employers in the world hate old people. It's not my words. This is the research. Thus, there are lots of gray hairs limping around out there willing to take all your crappy lowball offers, and they're probably more loyal for those low wages than any younger worker you have in staff. Yay for capitalism. You get great talent at low rates. Who needs H-1Bs when we have old people? Now, I have to emphasize, this is not our research, right? This is what we put as is not Moneyball, is a poor attempt because we have given this talk just in the last couple weeks, and we've had people come up to us afterwards saying, and this is a very large organization, heads of HR, so we should hire people over 50 is what you're saying? Or like, so we had to emphasize this is not the metric we believe that's right for hiring. In fact, in our research, we found the right metric for hiring was humility. Humility is the key metric that you have to screen for in hiring. That's a whole nother topic we can go into, so we'll not go into that here, but hiring 50-year-olds, if you want to try it, go ahead, but that's not what we're encouraging. If you don't mind, Meghan and I both went to school in Boston, so if you don't mind just kind of entertaining me for a second, let's just pretend the New England Patriots is one of the greatest sports teams the world's ever seen. Just for a second, if you can expand your imagination. And if you don't mind just following that thought, Bill Belichick, by the way, is one of the most winningest coaches right now in the history of professional football. He has a winning track record in games that is to die for. 5 Super Bowl rings. But the reason I bring up Belichick is he is the leader of the New England Patriots. He makes the decisions. And what Belichick is doing, and I'm simplifying of all the things he has to do, what he's doing, So Bill Belichick, one of the things he has to do is come up with a starting lineup, right? He has to determine amongst his players after, preseason and whatnot, who is going to start, right? And Tom Brady has been in there consistently, other players, but it's changing. Starting lineup. Then he makes real-time adjustments. As the game is going on, whether it's the same game, the next game, he's making adjustments. And then practice ground. If you are on the bench and you're not in the starting lineup, you're training harder than the bench for the chance to get to the starting lineup. Practice ground is critical. So one of the people that, we have a funny story I won't go into, with Robert Kraft, who owns the Patriots. So let's just pretend for a second if I'm Robert Kraft, and I go to Belichick and say, you're just an amazing coach. You're an amazing leader. I want you to guarantee me you'll win next year's Super Bowl, right? Do it again. Make number 6 next year's Super Bowl. But I've got 3 constraints I'm going to put on you. But you're so good that shouldn't even matter. And these are the constraints I would like to put on you. 1, you can't change the starting lineup. Once you decide who's going to start at the beginning of the season, that cannot change. And if somehow something goes wrong in the starting lineup, it's up or out, meaning once you made the starting lineup, there's no way back to the bench. It's out of the team. You can only promote up. You can never go down. Game day only. There is no practice ground, right? Everything is mission critical. Everything is at that day. You cannot practice. Now go win me that Super Bowl. He can't do it. He would never take up that job. And yet, if you think of how we run our companies, our organizations, even I'm sure at the CIA, have you ever heard of a reorg that doesn't get the feeling of, oh my God, someone had a brain, tumor, the management team doesn't know what they're doing, here we go again? The idea of changing the lineup is, oh my God, indecisive. They have no backbone. They can't make a decision, right? It is like the dreaded reorg that cannot occur. Then of the idea of promote but never demote. Now, once you get promoted in titles, there are ways that people do get demoted. You get demoted in your decision-making power. The senior advisor to this course, or there's ways that people can get moved aside in their decision-making power. But the idea of putting someone back in the bench because they're having an off season, an off year, to then retrain to come back, God forbid the shame of it, they won't do it. The idea of practice ground. The thought that you can listen to talks and read books and get lectured on, and then you're just supposed to do well. I love this thing with Mike Tyson. There's a great picture usually of him. Talks about how everyone has a plan of how to win in boxing until they get punched in the face. Then they can't remember a thing. That's what practice is needed for. No matter how much you know what you're supposed to do, in these instances, say this and do that, even in parenting, when you're punched in the face is when you forget everything. And that is why you need practice. So we're going to dive in deep about the notion of what is the noise versus signal on leadership. The kind of feedback you get on how to be a great leader. You think about all the things out there. You hear about, character. You hear about, TED Talks and books and lectures and white papers. There's so much feedback. It's almost urban legends going from person to person. I'm sure the former head of the CIA, the former heads will pass down some, when I was a leader, this is what worked for me. And you get these like morsels, almost like tiny Post-it notes of like, this is the secret, take it, and then use it. And that's how leadership is learned. And what's fascinating is McKinsey did a study going to Fortune 100 companies, asking CEOs, how important is leadership? Do you invest in it? And every CEO across the board said it's the most important thing. It's the single most important thing in our organization. They put more investment. If you see what JP Morgan Chase had done, we spent half a day. They built one floor with over $100 million just to train their senior leaders. The who's who of people they bring in, everything is taken care of. So companies invest in leadership training more than anything else. But then McKinsey asked the second question, does it work? Do you get ROI? Is it effective? Does it work? Over 90% of the CEOs said it doesn't work. In fact, it produces 0 to no ROI. Well, why do you do it? You have to do it. It's that important. Whether you have a great relationship with your mother, whether you invest in making a great relationship with your mother or not, you kind of have to do it. There are things that you have to do. Leadership is an investment that you have to make, and yet the CEOs themselves, who are ROI metric focused, are saying it doesn't work, and yet they say it's so important you still have to do it. So time we have spent with thousands of organizations of all types, we found common patterns. There are 12 signals of low versus high performance. You'll find many more, but these are the top 12, so just rattle through and share some of this. Low-performing organizations tend to have a lot of entitlement. I deserve this. They owe me this. Why are they not assigning me a mentor? How am I supposed to advance in my career unless someone takes care of this for me? A lot of entitlement. You find victim mindset. Everything is impossible. Why bother? Then you have death by 1,000 cuts. Little things go wrong all the time. There's no gas. People don't give a shit. There's no gas. Not my job. You do the minimum required. If you don't get in trouble, don't do it. Lying, hiding, faking. This is a term that Meghan had coined going a while back. The idea of walking on eggshells around someone. How much you cannot say. Because if you do, if you tell them what you're really thinking, career over. Or they will just lose it. So you have to lie, hide, and fake around people, and you yourself become a master of lying, hiding, faking. At some point, some people don't even realize who the real person is. Is this the real me or the fake me? I'm not quite sure. Someone's called politics. Bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is another word for rules. You have a lot of rules for people you don't trust to do the right thing. I have an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old. There's a lot of bureaucracy in our house. There's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to knives around the stove. There's a lot of bureaucracy when it comes to how you play with toys, when other guests come over and other play dates come over. We have a lot of bureaucracy, in particular for the 3-year-old, even more than the 8-year-old. Bureaucracy, a lot of rules occur when you don't trust the judgment of your people. Tolerating badness. This is low expectations both of yourself or others. And there's an or here because oftentimes when you are not doing something well, you might feel it's inappropriate to actually give advice or expect something high of someone when you yourself aren't doing it. So welcome to parenting, right? Like, you cannot swear, Jackson. But Dad, I just heard you swear yesterday. Well, you still cannot swear. It's an or because whether you are doing it or not, you have to have a high expectation of others, but also of yourself. When you feel like a hypocrite, it's more incentive to go fix yourself and get better. Obsession in the short-term results. Everything is mission critical, right? There's probably nothing that isn't mission critical. Fear of failure. Solo stars, as well as arrogance and insecurity. Arrogance, by definition, is when you are overly confident and not humble enough. Insecurity is when you're overly humble and not confident enough. At the point of stress, people will flip-flop between an arrogant decision and an insecure decision. You know, you were a little reckless. You were a little aggressive. You made your point so strong it was belligerent. That's arrogant. Why didn't you speak up? Why are you like paralyzed? You need to act. You need to do something. That's insecurity. And people flip-flop between the two. They tend to sit together. So when you look on the flip side, you've got gratitude. And gratitude, above all else, is people know that their success does not come from themselves being so great, but somebody helped them succeed. There's not a single person in this room who didn't have somebody sacrifice for them to get you here. No matter how miserable you might think your job is, you could have been much worse off if someone did not help you get to where you are. You have responsibility. And responsibility has this balance of faith and reality. It's not that it will work out, but the fact that we're grounded in the reality of how some of the tough challenges we have in front of us. GSD, get shit done. Teams will swarm and fix problems. A light bulb's broken, it'll get fixed instantly. You see a problem, you see trash on the floor, it's gone before you look at it again. That's the kind of team that performs well. Gas, high effort, lots of care. You can tell the difference with someone who just gets the job done versus someone who really cares. There's a material difference. No LHF. Now, this is one of the hardest things to understand. The idea of no LHF is that you're going to err on the side of informating, sharing information that might even make you look bad, but it might help the team. It might help somebody else. That's difficult to do because oftentimes it will make you look bad. Trust. You treat people like adults versus the opposite being bureaucracy or lots of rules. Brilliant in the basics. There's very high expectations of both yourself and others. Always both. Playing the long game, space to fail, practice ground. You need to practice. Otherwise, you won't know what failure feels like. And so as a result of it, next time you fail, You crawl into a hole and never show up again. Investment in loss. We think of investment in loss because when you try anything that is out of your comfort zone, that's difficult, you're going to lose. You ever try to drive a car for the first time? I don't think any one of us got in the car and said highway right away, instantly. It takes practice, which is why you go in the parking lot, which is why you go to places where you can actually try things. That trying things out of your comfort zone is an investment in loss, because over time, that tuition is what makes you get better. Camaraderie. It's taking care of others. Because high-performing teams, you know they have your back. The balance of confidence and humility. No matter how low your score may be, there's an element of balance that will help you make the right call, give you the agility to know this is a time to speak up, this is a time to listen. This is a time to be optimistic, this is a time to be pessimistic. No matter what situation, you have to look at every situation. It's never one or the other. You need the agility to go either way. This is the difference between low and high performing, and most people look at this, right? I don't know how you're feeling here in the CIA, but every organization we've talked to looks at this list and says, Charlie, you're like describing us on the left and none of on the right. What do we do? This place is awful. If you feel depressed, the next slide will help you feel a little less depressed. Because you're not alone, everybody's there. And the difference of how do you take an organization from the left to the right, it's leadership. Because the flip side is this. When you're in the left side, you know what people gripe about? Water cooler talk, go to the bars. Leadership sucks here. We have no leadership. No one's making a decision. Someone needs to fix this. There's a sense that there is lack of or there is no leadership. But when there's great leadership, oftentimes they won't even give credit to leadership. They'll just say that, oh my God, I'm a next jumper. My organization, my team, my enterprise, we're just awesome. Most of the players in the Patriots probably think they're just awesome, part of an awesome team. They don't even recognize what Belichick is doing. That's a sign of a great leader, too. So to help you feel, if you feel a little depressed that you're on the left side, a little less depressed, the evolution of work and how work has changed. So you're thinking, if you look at the workforce, there's boomers, Gen X, and millennials. There's 3 generations working. And the picture on the very left, by the way, comes from manufacturing versus the information age. And if you don't know this, the desks that they're working in, there's a reason why universities still look this way when it comes to desks. Universities were built as a training ground for factory workers. They were literally set up so they can train and get an advantage for people who were going to graduate and then go work in factories. And when you work in a factory, manufacturing, conformity was the key. Do you think they really want to see show of hands who has an idea of how to do everything better? Right? Do you want to hear an opinion? You need everyone to get that job done the exact way I want it and then punch in, punch out. And if you don't work out, I replace you. That's how manufacturing ran. Well, the information age is different. This is now about creativity. It's around innovation. It's around creating something that never existed before. Diversity of thought. Diversity became a bigger issue because different people think differently. Men and women see the world differently. If that isn't clear, just have some conversations looking at the same thing. You'll see different things. You ever see 2 people read a 1-page article, highlighted completely differently? 1 page. You're like, how is it? I just highlighted the most important parts, and someone's like, I highlighted the most important parts. It's the opposite of what I highlighted. Diversity of thinking is what it takes. And if you think of what happened when it came to decision making, this is what it looked like. You had senior management who made 100% of the decisions. Keep in mind, decisions are strategy. 0% of the doing, and the workers, 0% of strategy, 100% of the doing. And that decision-making team of senior management was very small, 2%, 1%, maybe less. Well, the world's changed where starting only 2 years ago, we heard this common term being used everywhere, junior leadership, junior leadership. You have junior leaders and senior leaders, and decision-making is on a spectrum. And you can move up and down based on your trending performance. Make a lot of bad calls, they will remove your decision-making ability. Make a lot of good calls, they will increase your decision-making ability. And everyone, even at the very top, you have to get into the work or else you will lose touch with what it takes to do work. Whether it's senior engineers that still need to touch code and look at the code at some point, whether it's senior people who have to go and do some kind of sales pitch, do some kind of analytics, you have to be in the work enough, but you're seeing people move up and down the spectrum. So the good news of how not far behind you are, we saw an inflection point show up in 2015. The old way, the outdated way of management, of strategy, moving to the new way, that inflection occurred in 2015. Josh Bersin is one of the top human capital analysts out there from Deloitte. Does a report every year called the Bersin Report. In 2015, his study, he found that the top 3 items in every CEO's list, culture was up there in the top 3 strategic, not an HR, some group, culture person job, but the CEOs had this in the top 3 of strategies. In 2016, culture was the most searched word on Google. By 17, which is what we're in now, it's been accelerating at a crazy pace. So what occurred in 2015 that made this inflection? So if you know millennials, and some of you are here millennials, and you have millennials in the workforce, right? They got a lot of gripes. Right? They have a list of ways you can make the workforce better, right? And that's great. And they talk about how 2020, 75% of the workforce is millennials. The volume of millennials at work is not the issue, is not the challenge. It's when they get into positions of leadership and they start making decisions because they're in power to make decisions is when suddenly the whole thing changes. The oldest millennial was born in 1981. In 2015, they were 34. You know what happens in your mid-30s? You get into positions of leadership. The challenges of leadership showed up in big ways. And by the way, to be honest, it's not like millennials are perfect. They know it all. They have problems, in particular, asking for help. They know how to Google it. Talking to another person about it, very difficult. They will spend 5 days staying up all night looking up something that if you ask someone would have been answered in 2 minutes. This is a common problem. And so when you actually get put into roles of responsibility and you don't know how to find a solution, like a true story. We run a lot of coaching sessions internally. A repeating question that came up through millennial leaders was dead serious. Every 2 weeks, you can ask us one thing to help you on. How often do you call your mother? We're like, what? You can ask the CEOs anything, and this is it's been bothering them. They've been online looking it up. So I typed up, how often should you call your mother? All variations of how often you call your mother-in-law if you were in university. I mean, I was like, oh my God. People are actually Google searching how often do you call your mother. Then there are blog posts and there's all kinds of noise of what the answers are. And it's still unclear. It's kind of crazy, but this is true. Go look it up when you get home. Since you don't have computers here, I guess, that you can look up. But 34. This inflection point literally showed up very recently. So we spent time with all the knowledge and all the data and work we did, coming together, putting Moneyball with leadership, and said, with all the noise out there, can you distill it down to levels and find a way to give signals of how to navigate through one of the most complex soft skills that is the hardest to master? So we found 5 levels. And the leveling matters. The sequence absolutely matters. Level 1 was you have to have gas. Level 2 was no lying, hiding, and faking. Then you had independent thinking, which is what you need to then invite critical feedback. And ultimately, it leads to decision making. And I'll cover this in much more detail. But what we found was the foundation is what most of us don't have. Try to drive great strategy, great decision making on a foundation of people who don't have gas, and everyone is lying, hiding, and faking. Good luck. You will go bankrupt. You will be Borders bookstore. So looking at the same thing, and by the way, we'll go into detail because what we found was the money metric. The similar metric to the on-base percentage where failure occurs the most often is level 2 on no lying, hiding, and faking. And in fact, last year's TED Talk, which Meghan and I talked about, and the topic was truth, we talked about why do people lie. I know sometimes you're in the business of lying in here, but the problem is if you do it all the time, everywhere, you will forget what telling the truth is like. So looking at the exact same diagram in levels, think of what happens from being junior going into senior, right? You go from level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the point of failure repeatedly is at level 2. And I have to start by saying outcome matters. And this is not an amateur sport. When you look at amateur sports, it's about being fair. It's about being nice. It's about just showing up. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for just smiling and being nice to other people. Let's talk about whose turn it is now, because it's about fairness. You're in a professional sport. The days of amateur sports are usually long gone for most of us. And in professional sports, results matter. If you don't get the results and it's not consistent, you will lose your job. Other people will lose their livelihood. So I'm going to peel this backwards of what happens here. So when you think of decision-making at level 5, when outcome doesn't show up, you go to the leader, the person who made the decision, and you ask them, were you paralyzed versus making a decision? HBR did a 10-year study called the CEO Genome Project, and they said one of the top traits of the 4 traits, number 1 trait was the ability to make decisions with speed and conviction. But then, of course, instantly someone says, well, are they thoughtful or are they reckless? Right? So if you see someone making a thoughtless and reckless decision, you have to peel it back and say, wait a sec. The notion that innovation is a social process. You need groupthink. You need the power of other people and what their thoughts are. Did you get any feedback on this decision? Did you really decide on your own? Did you make the strategy with absolutely no input, no feedback? Or did you go and get feedback? And then, of course, the question is, from who? The same person who gave you bad advice last time 6 times in a row is the same person you asked? Did you get feedback from the right person? And over time, you know who gives better feedback and who doesn't. Then if you didn't do that, you go back and say, wait a sec, you're not getting any feedback. That's a common thing. I don't get any feedback. Do you only point out problems? You never contribute an original thought. Can you be creative and innovative? And some of you may say, I have no creativity. It's not me. Can you make something that did not exist? Because with artificial intelligence coming in and everyone talking about how robots will take over the world, the one trait that human beings have is creativity. We can create something where it did not exist. Machines analyze data, find patterns, and creativity is the human gene that makes us unique. And this is something called independent thinking that is required before you get feedback. If you read the news and then regurgitate the news, you're going to get no feedback. But if you have a different point of view than what is read, you're going to get an opinion. You're going to get feedback. Original thought is needed to draw in feedback. But it can't be in your own head. You have to share it. Which then leads to the question of lying, hiding, faking. What's holding you back? Why are you not speaking up? Why is it like your lips are moving but no words are coming out? What are you not telling me? What's your hidden agenda? What's your motive? People who lie, hide, and fake, you don't trust them. You didn't tell me the whole truth. What's missing? What are you not telling me? And then, of course, when you go all the way back, do you really want to talk to and hear from someone who's not even showing up? Who doesn't even seem to care about the enterprise, about the team, only about themselves? So the notion of understanding this in depth is very difficult, but it'll happen easier through practice. And so without enough time to go into every detail, we'll try to give you a sense of where we found to be the easiest way to practice. So first, going into level 1, gas. This diagram defines what no gas looks like. No matter how good your strategy is, if your people don't have gas, it will not work. I got the job done. It's a common thing you hear. Got the job done, and this is how no gas shows up. What we found of how to create gas, in fact, the top 2 are the easiest to do. Good food, believe it or not, creates gas. And when it's healthy and delicious, there's a lot of healthy and disgusting, right? When it's healthy and delicious, people appreciate it more. You're taking care of them. Recognition, not recognizing who is the strongest, most powerful, smartest person, but recognizing the servant leader that helped you succeed. Community, doing things together absolutely matters. Touching the mission. I'm sure you see this. You guys obviously have a lot of mission, but the longer people go without touching the mission, things go wrong. The problem we've seen even in the military is this. They're on mission maybe 5 to 10% of the time. 90% they're in garrison. They're not on mission, and they don't know or haven't found ways to touch the mission, and that's where ethical breaches and everything wrong starts to occur. We spent time with the Navy. We went to Whidbey Island in Seattle just in February, taking our 14 leaders up there for 2 full days of training. And this is someone from the Navy shared, which we love. Food is the fastest way to impact morale. You can feel it almost instantly. If the food is good, morale is high. If the food is bad, morale goes down. Also, food is a huge responsibility, watching expiration dates, cleanliness. And what we have learned is this: healthy food is even harder in all our lives. And that creates gas in taking care of your people. They said the number one thing people remember from deployment is not the hard work and suffering, but instead the camaraderie, bonding, everybody invested in everyone else's success and growth. And they said when people don't touch the mission on a consistent basis, bad things happen. They found the exact same things we found. Give you a sense, and I'll show you this technology because what we ended up building over the last 2 decades and more in the last decade is around 50 different applications, which I know you're not allowed to use phones here, but they're mobile apps that help companies run themselves better. And as crazy as it sounds, after spending hundreds of millions of dollars building this technology, we're giving it all away for free, with the goal, the social movement, of helping companies run more effectively. So we started launching only as of last October, releasing these apps, and started to release the first 5. One of them is a recognition app. This app, there's a currency in there called WOW points. It's a penny a point. Everyone gets 1,000, which is $10. It's worthless unless you give it away. And you can make 1,000 vote or 1,000 one-point votes, and you write in who helped you succeed this month. It's a question. Who in the organization helped you succeed? And you vote, and you can see them in real time. This is a live stock market of the #1 servant leader in the company, and you can click on and see the details of what people have said about them. Trust me, it creates a lot of gas. But I'll spend more time on the no lying, hiding, faking. And this is the hardest one to understand, which Meghan will go into more depth too. Some of the amazing people we meet, one of them is a guy named Peter Gorman. Peter Gorman, if you haven't heard of him, the heart rate monitor and polar tech and treadmills, elliptical machines. So he invented the technology that makes the actual tracking of the heart rate. In fact, his royalties is 10% of everything Polar Tech sells globally for 20 years. To give you a flavor of what that looks like, $2 to $4 million checks per week for 20 years. He's successful. He created several other businesses, but one of the last businesses he built in technologies is a machine called the Optogate. It's taking the lens of the Hubble telescope, so it looks billions of light years away, with lasers from ski racing, and he instead points it at the human body, where when you walk, it can see what the naked eye cannot see. So you're like, what do you use this for? Well, when you think of someone that gets old and once they fall at age 80 or 90, usually it's the beginning of the end. Balance is one of the biggest keys. And so he found that you can prevent 90-something% of sports injuries because you see the imbalance showing up in their walk way before, months before the injury actually occurs. There are fluke accidents, but injuries occur. I'll give you another sense of what he did. The U.S. Olympic team used to go to their destination spots, whether it's Beijing or whether it's going to Brazil, 3 days before the event. Olympic athletes are training for 4 years, sometimes for a 30-second event, 3 days before they would go to the event. So they took the machine, this is going back a while, and they optogated them before they got on the plane. And then when they got off the plane, they measured them every day to see when they would get back to normal, the exact same numbers as when they boarded the plane. 5 days. They trained 4 years, right? And it might be minuscule, the difference in balance, but the vibrations in the plane threw off their balance, that it took 5 days to come back to the same place, and they trained 4 years, their whole life, to try to win gold, and the difference in gold and silver, or even medaling, is a fraction of a second. So every U.S. Olympic athlete goes 1 week in advance now because of this machine. So pretty cool guy, right? So Meghan and I meet this guy, we spend time with him, and one of the things that we hear about is this guy named Michael. So Michael is a 36-year-old who had a car accident and then got a metal plate put in his head, which rotted, which led to him being paralyzed neck down. 6 years of rehab and the best money can buy, and was told you can never walk again. Peter Gorman takes him. What happened was he was literally on the track walking one way. Michael was being dragged by 2 big men just for fresh air across the track. Stops, asks him what happened, tells a story, and Peter Gorman says, "Come to my office. Let me try to help you." In 90 days, he got him walking. 90 days. He's running a marathon now. He did this twice for some other guy who had a football injury. So when you meet someone like this, although my mom's a pastor, I don't believe it's a Jesus thing. I don't believe it's magic. I want to know, how'd you do it? So, of course, start picking apart how he did it. And he said, "Charlie, it's actually quite straightforward. I have this machine, right? And then I have this thing called a second screen. The second screen is what you see up there, the monitor, and it shows you how you're walking in real time, the right way and the wrong way to walk. And because the guy couldn't walk in the beginning, 2 men had to move his feet so he can see what it looks like, right and left, and being balanced or imbalanced. Watching himself every day, practicing this, and in his mind, he started to then get his body to move. In 90 days, he started to walk. When I asked Peter, we'd call him Doc, how'd you do this? He said, human beings are wired, actually, to do the right thing. We're wired to do the right thing. We're wired to fix ourselves, except we don't know the truth of the difference between right and wrong. So we often do the wrong thing. If you hurt your right leg, what do? You kind of go like this, right? You won't heal. You have to put pressure on the pain, and that is the only way it will actually heal. Yet the intuition in us says, don't press through the pain. That would hurt yourself more. Avoid the pain. This is the insight. I love this thing Tom sort of shared with our group. This self-correction insight is huge. Self-awareness. If you know the truth, you will correct. You will do the right thing. But the key is you have to know the truth. You have to know right and wrong. I share this in the TED Talk we came last year. This is really easy to stand behind the line of comforting lies, right? Anyone here have a compliment of how well I presented? Please stand up on the right side. Anybody else on the left? You can tell which line I'm going to go to. You want to get compliments, comforting lies, unpleasant truths. But you have to think, not only what do you want to hear, do you know how hard it is to stand behind or sit behind the booth? How much easier it is to tell someone, yeah, you're great. Nah, don't worry about it. I know you're having problems in your career, but you'll be fine. Comforting lies, right? Why open the can of worms? Unpleasant truths. Have you considered what a shitty employee you are? Have you considered? They might pick different language, right? Pick different words. I tend to be more arrogant, so ignore my choice of words here. But what's crazy? That people call it brutal truth. Sometimes it's too brutal. Most of us have one friend, at least one person in our lives that gives us brutal truth. You know what's crazy? I bet you they're your closest friend. That person is closer to you than anybody else. We lack the people in our lives that tell us the truth. And despite how hard it is to hear, they're good for you. And you do the same for them, and that's what makes a relationship work. What we found was this. It is so hard for people to actually speak the truth. Technology can aid it. So we built a feedback app, which gives feedback anonymously. You rate 1, 2, 3, 4, very simple rating. There's no middle. There's only an upper half, lower half, which is important. Below expectations, meets expectations, exceeds, and far exceeds. You write a comment, it's anonymous, but it's not a stranger in the internet. It'd be someone in the room right now. And then it starts to measure the trending history of how you're getting ranked. And this is what we learned about feedback. And people hate anonymous feedback. So there are absolutely places, when we vote for the leadership, it's not anonymous. Your name is attached and you say, good or bad so we can follow up. But when it comes to feedback of this sort for development, to get to the truth, what we found was this. It had to be anonymous and it had to be visceral, meaning it had to be immediate. The more time we had to think about it, we logicked our way to be nice. Niceness, right? Usually is inauthentic kindness. We found a way to be nice. We found a way to say, I don't want someone telling me that, so I would feel bad. So and then, maybe I won't say anything. Or maybe I'll just give them more of a cryptic, good job. Or a little shit sandwich, right? You're so great, but I wish you could do this better, but you're so great. When it's anonymous, when it's visceral, you get a very different reaction. So one of the easiest ways to start, by the way, is a debrief. Whether you use technology or not, you don't even have to use it. But you can get into the practice where after a meeting, after a project, for the ability for the person, you in the middle, to come up and actually first score yourself. If I come up and say, I score myself a 3. I exceeded expectations. Now someone wants to ask, what do you define expectations? Well, if you have low expectations, trust me, you'll define it low. If you have high expectations, you'll define it high. It's irrelevant. Just score yourself and explain the reasons why. Then let the room start to talk. And if you're worried of actually, without using technology, right, I would encourage you to go from the most junior person in the room to the most senior person. Because once a senior person speaks, the rest of them say, yep, same thing. Or they find another way to say the same thing. Let the most junior person go first, and then work your way up, and let them score. So you need a numerical score, and then back it up. And score them only on one thing that really matters. The level of lying, hiding, faking. How do they score 1 to 4 and no LHF? And no LHF is very important because a lot of times we are transparent on the question we got asked. This is the classic fight with spouses, right? Well, you never asked me that question. You never asked about that, but I disclosed everything you asked for, so wasn't I honest? No, you weren't. You held back a lot of relevant information. In fact, one of the most important diligent questions we get when we do private equity is, what question have I not asked that I should be asking? Meaning, give me no LHF, no lying, hiding, faking. Give me anything that might be relevant, even remotely. And that's a high bar to clear. It takes practice. This is looking at some of the early data now. Tom, our head of engineering, has been spearheading the metrics division of this. What's cool is this. So the graphics didn't come out right. When you get a lot of feedback, you're trending up, investment loss is trending down. It's better to trend down than to be hiding or flat in feedback. In fact, one of the coolest insights he just found is this. Low-performing teams have leaders who are hiding. Low-performing teams have leaders who either have no feedback or are difficult to give feedback to, which creates no feedback. I don't know about you, but being in a CEO position, that's pretty good stuff. That I can actually, through feedback data and a feedback tool, identify the low-performing teams. We have, similar to the CIA, a no firing policy, but we know now how to improve them differently than high-performing teams or teams that are investing in loss. The ability to find and identify them is critical. The idea of Mike Tyson. If you've ever read this book, Blessings of a Skinned Knee, it was never written. There's no version, Blessings of a Broken Leg, right? There's no parent who will say, you know what, I'm a tough parent. I want my child to learn, which is why I like to have them break their legs, break their limbs. They can all heal. It doesn't exist. But a skinned knee, children who don't skin their knees, a lot of bigger problems come. If you watch Bubble Boy and Seinfeld, bad things happen to Bubble Boys. You need the skin knee. Parker, after he came to visit us, and one of the things he did actually was take away this insight. A lot of companies who visit from Leadership Academy take away this insight. This is a ship. If you blow a hole above the waterline, it looks ugly, but the ship will not sink. If you blow a hole below the waterline, the ship will sink and people will die. Revenue for us is below the waterline. It is very difficult to practice. Let people skin a knee on revenue. It is mission critical. And depending on your level of profitability and the strength of your revenue and balance sheets, that waterline will move up or down, meaning revenue might be 90% of what you need to obsess about. The idea of culture, the idea of even who organized this event, I think Parker did, and who is helping escort the TED Talk speakers. Is that mission critical? Or is that a culture initiative above the waterline? Because that's where you need to practice. No matter how much you read about getting punched in the face for boxing, watch videos of what punch in the face feels like, simulate punch in the face, it is different than getting punched in the face. Now, someone says something as idiotic as, well, does that mean I have to go and get punched in the face? Like just stand there? No. You're trying not to get punched in the face. But you know what happens when you practice a lot? With better and better players, it is inevitable you will get punched in the face. If you practice and apply enough stress and culture, you will get punched in the face. And then the more you do that, you will build a tolerance. You will build the ability to not get paralyzed, not to get arrogant, not to get insecure, and navigate your way through, and it will show up in your revenue work. In fact, we use this example. In July 16, CIA team attends our academy. In February, we get a note from Parker that he got approved to start to create culture as a practice ground to train leaders in the CIA. So I hope you're doing a lot more of this because you're going to need the practice. And lying, hiding, faking is so easy. No lying, hiding, and faking. It's a lot easier to debrief, score someone, give critical feedback on something like this, an event, than something like Syria.